Hello and welcome to FantasyInsiders.com. This is Mr. Tuttle05 bringing you a video here for Week 10 in the NFL. The video theme is top 6 plays for $6,000 or less on FanDuel. I had previously done an article that was top 5, 5K or less on FanDuel, but it appears that FanDuel did get a little sharper with their pricing here this week. So there's not a whole lot to offer under that $5,000 threshold. So I decided to bump it up and give you guys some better value plays for under $6,000. Before I get into my rankings, I do want to say that don't necessarily pay attention too close to where a player is ranked. There's not going to be a whole lot of difference between the number 1 ranked player and the number 6 ranked player. More so the purpose of this video or article is to give you guys 6 players that are solid value plays for the week. So I think these guys warrant further consideration into insertion of your rosters or lineups this week. I wanted to give you guys these 6 guys, and then I'll let you guys make the final decision on if these players are good enough to fit your roster. So without further ado, the first guy in my ranking is Pierre Thomas. Pierre Thomas this week is listed for $5,600 on FanDuel, and a lot of Thomas's value will depend on Darren Sproles' status for Week 10. Sproles did go out in Week 9 with a concussion, and there was also some speculation that he had an ankle injury as well. If Sproles is able to go in Week 10, that obviously devalues Pierre Thomas a little bit. But I think he still is a fairly solid value play, even if Sproles is able to go in Week 10. But that is an injury you'll want to keep an eye out for. In Week 9, Sproles, or I should say Pierre Thomas, didn't get necessarily as many carries as I would have expected. I believe he ended up with 6 carries for 24 yards, which isn't anything groundbreaking or earth-shattering. However, he did catch 7 balls out of the backfield for 66 yards. Which is obviously good right there. That in itself provides value for Pierre Thomas. If he's even can come close to replicating those receiving numbers out of the backfield in Week 10, he's well on his way to becoming a good play and hitting value pretty easily. Thomas and the Saints face off against the Cowboys in Sunday Night Football, and that is projected to be the second highest over-under highest scoring game of the week. It currently sits at 53.5. The only other higher over-under on the week is the Broncos versus the Chargers. So you'll be seeing a lot of scoring in that Sunday night game with the Saints and Cowboys. And the nice thing about Thomas that we did already hit on with his receiving in the backfield, he's not dependent on game situation. Thomas is going to be in there if the Saints are ahead or if they're behind and throwing to catch up. So that's always something to look at when you're looking for those value plays out there, if those guys are dependent on game situations or not. The next guy that I want to mention should see plenty of opportunity here. $100 more than Pierre Thomas would be Rashad Jennings. Jennings, to me, actually had a very quiet Week 9, a quietly good Week 9, I should say. It went unnoticed on my radar, at least. I'm not sure of anyone else out there, but with McFadden going down, Jennings had 15 carries for 102 yards, a touchdown, and he actually outdid Pierre Thomas as far as receiving. He had 7 receptions for 74 yards. So that's a monster game right there alone. If you even get half those numbers in Week 10, you're looking at Jennings as being a good play. Jennings is another guy, just like Pierre Thomas, where he's not dependent on game situation. As long as he's in there, McFadden's out. He's not going to get sit or benched if they're behind in the game because he's so good at catching the ball out of the backfield as well. So he's a guy that's going to get a lot of playing time, especially with McFadden out, no matter the game situation. And he can provide you a dual threat. He's going to get you points on the ground as well as through the air. So I think Jennings is a really good play this week against the Giants. Then going on to who I have ranked as my third guy under 6,000. He is a receiver here, and it's Terrence Williams for $5,700. I have not been the hugest fan of Terrence Williams, even though his production has been really well, other than last week. I think the 4 weeks before that he had a touchdown in all those games. And for whatever reason, I've never been a huge fan of Terrence Williams, but you can't overlook this matchup that he has. Again, he's in the same Sunday night game as Pierre Thomas, projected to be the second highest scoring game of the week, and the Cowboys are projected to be playing from behind for most of the game, which obviously plays well into Tony Romo and the passing game. Williams, despite not putting up good numbers last week, was still targeted 7 times. You can't really ask for a whole lot more than that out of a guy that you're paying $5,700 for. So you're likely going to get a guy that's going to be in a high-scoring game, playing from behind, and is going to get around 7 targets. So that's great for $5,700. And then you also have to add to the fact that Terrence Williams is really the Cowboys' big play guy. So he's always got that potential to bust you a long touchdown, and if he does do that, obviously he immediately hits value. Now for the number 4 ranking here, you're going to have to go to tight end, and I feel a little sleazy ranking a tight end, but I got to do it. That would be Antonio Gates at 5,600. Gates is going to be playing in what will likely be the highest scoring game of the week. That is the Broncos at the Chargers. And he is going against a Broncos team who is in the bottom third of defending against the tight end. Gates hasn't had a great game, or a monster game at least, in a while. He hasn't produced eye-dropping numbers, or mouth-dropping numbers, I should say, in a while. But he has still been consistently receiving a solid amount of targets. For the season, Gates has received over 8 targets a game, which is tremendous for $5,600 on FanDuel. And Gates is another guy, just like Terrence Williams, who's going to be in a really high-scoring game, playing from behind, and should receive plenty of targets. So you're looking at a guy that has plenty of upside, and I think his floor is there as well, as you can see by looking at his previous week's statistics. And this is probably going to sound a little crazy, even though Jimmy Graham has a amazing matchup this week against the Dallas Cowboys. I think value-wise that Gates is actually a better play than Jimmy Graham this week. You obviously may not agree with me on that. It is, to some people, would be an outlandish statement, but I think it is something worth considering. Take a closer look at Antonio Gates and see what he does to open up your salary cap. If you work Gates in there as opposed to Jimmy Graham, you obviously have a lot more wiggle room and a lot more to work with your other roster positions. So my suggestion would be, if you're high on Graham, try to work a lineup with Graham, try to work a lineup then with Gates in there, and kind of see the difference and compare the two lineups, and then end up going with what roster you like the better of the two. Now, number 5, pains me to even talk about this guy, pains me to even rank this guy. That'd be Golden Tate. I absolutely hate Golden Tate. I personally believe he is an arrogant player without a ton of skill. And add that on top of the fact that I'm a huge Packer fan, and so obviously he was the recipient of the Hail Mary against the Packers last year. So I don't like the guy at all. If he would have at least admitted that he pushed off and had the obvious offensive pass interference call, if he would have admitted that he pushed off, I would have gained a little more respect for him back. Obviously, they're not going to go back and change your pass interference call, so it doesn't do you anything to admit that you had offensive pass interference. But he vehemently denied it, and he still would to this day vehemently deny that he pushed off, which is ridiculous in my mind. But anyways, I digress. As to why Golden Tate is a solid option this week, he has jumped into being the number 1 receiving option, at least, with the injury to Sidney Rice. He obviously didn't put up huge numbers in Week 9 but I still think he is that #1 receiving option in this Seattle offense. Percy Harvin's not expected back for Week 10, so you don't have to worry about that. And as long as Darrell Bevell, the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, continues his idiotic play calling, you may as well take advantage of it. If I'm Darrell Bevell, I'm simply having Russell Wilson turn around and hand the ball off to Marshawn Lynch about 30 times a game. They haven't been doing that lately. They've been dropping back to pass a lot more frequently than I think is probably wise. But once again, as long as they're dropping back to pass, that provides Tate with a decent amount of value. So I think Tate at 4,500. If you need a minimum price guy, I think he is your best minimum price option out there. Then last but not least, the number 6 guy on my list would be Denarius Moore. It does somewhat pain me again to rank 2 Oakland guys as my top 6K or less. I don't think the Giants' defense is as bad as some people say they are. And I honestly I considered not ranking Denarius Moore due to the uncertainty of Terrell Pryor playing in Week 10. But the more that I thought about it, I actually think if McGloin does start in Week 10, that probably does actually give Denarius Moore a tiny bit of bump in value. It's pure speculation to say that, but McGloin is certainly the more accurate of the 2 quarterbacks. So if the Raiders get into a situation where they're having to throw the ball, which I do think they'll get in that situation at least late into the game, if not even yet in the first half. But I do think the Raiders will be playing from behind. McGloin's going to have to put some air under the ball if he's going to be playing. And obviously in that situation, Denarius Moore sees a huge bump in value if the Raiders are playing from behind and they're having to throw. So I think Moore is a solid option for 5,000. I forget what his numbers were last week. Let me look those up real quick. Week 9, he was only 4,900. He saw 11 targets against the Philadelphia Eagles. Unfortunately, he only converted on 5 of those for 82 yards. But that 5 for 82 yards, obviously, he's already hitting value there when he's priced at 5,000. But you can also see his upside just by looking at how many targets he got last week. Not necessarily expecting 11 targets, but I wouldn't be surprised if he sees that again in Week 10. So for a guy with that much upside that has big play ability and can really bust one at any point in time, I think Denarius Moore certainly warrants some consideration into insertion of your lineups this week. That is it, at least for my top 6 guys. I will list, I'll give you guys my honorable mention as well. Some of you may have obviously been able to notice that I kept T.Y. Hilton off of my rankings, despite that he's still priced at $6,000 on FanDuel. This is going to sound idiotic, and go ahead and judge me if you want to on it. I'm still not 100% sold on T.Y. Hilton. I do not think he is despite, once again, his amazing Week 9 performance, I don't think he's a good #1 receiver. I think when he is the #1 option in an offense that's actually, in the long term, going to decrease his value. We'll certainly be able to see that play out here for the rest of the season. He proved me wrong in Week 9. I don't know if I'm just being stubborn with it now or what, but I think T.Y. Hilton's certainly a fair play and probably a good play in Week 10 as well for his price. But I think these 6 guys that I mentioned above him are better value plays in my opinion. Another guy that I left out of my rankings, despite having a good Week 9, would be Mike James, Tampa Bay Bucks. There's still some speculation and some whisperings going around that Doug Martin could potentially be back in Week 10. But if he's not, James should get plenty of opportunity against a fairly weak rush defense in the Miami Dolphins. So that's something to pay attention to. Would be that Doug Martin injury. I don't think James is a bad play for $6,000 by any means. Another wide receiver that makes my honorable mention would be Kendall Wright. I forget exactly how much he is. Let's see here. Kendall Wright, 5,200. I think Tennessee's probably going to be running the ball quite a bit this game in Week 10 against the Jaguars, so that certainly devalues Kendall Wright a little bit. But I think Kendall Wright is still a good play at 5,200. He's receiving his fair share of targets. He only got 5 targets in Week 9, but was able to put up 69 yards at least. But prior to that, he saw targets of 12, 9, 8, and 8. So this is a guy that should provide you with plenty of opportunity with a fairly solid, a really solid matchup. So I think Kendall Wright is certainly in play at 5,200. And then I will provide you with 2 more tight ends, even though you probably don't want to hear them. These guys, once again, are my honorable mention rankings. The more and more I think and look into it, I don't think I can really pass up Antonio Gates for 5,600 as a main lineup play. I think he's pretty much cemented in my lineup at that price, especially in the game situation he'll be in. But if you're looking to save a little bit more money, I do like Garrett Graham at 5,100. He goes up against the Cardinals, who are the worst against the tight end in the league. You saw him provide a little bit of value in the second half of Week 9's game against the Colts. Finally, the Colts decided to try to shut down Andre Johnson, and when they did that, that opened up Garrett Graham a bit. And he put up some decent numbers in the second half in Week 9 once the defense was cued in on Andre Johnson. I expect that to be more of the case in Week 10, where the defense does see how, or the Cardinals do see how Andre Johnson burned the Colts in Week 9. So I expect them to have a little more concentration on Andre Johnson, which should open up some space for Garrett Graham. Then last but not least, I will give you another tight end option to possibly save some money on. That's going to be Jared Cook. And I do like Cook this week for only 4,800. He doesn't have a great matchup against the Colts, but he has been in the middle of the season. I guess we're in the middle of the season now, but about week 6, 7, 8, I forget exactly, maybe a little earlier than that, he was seeing a decreased snap count, a significantly decreased snap count, and was losing a lot of snaps to Lance Kendricks. This past week, it looks like he actually is starting to return those snaps or move those snaps back up. He's starting to get a little more snaps. With that, he should see increased targets. So I don't mind Jared Cook this week for 4,800. Well, that will do it for this video. I'll have a few more videos for you here later this week that you can check out. Feel free to head on over to fantasyinsiders.com. Head on over to our forums and comment on if you enjoyed the videos, if you have suggestions for future videos, if there's any other things you would like me to touch on with these videos or any articles that we do provide. Also, certainly feel free to tweet at me at Mr. Tuttle05, and make sure to follow Fantasy Insiders on Twitter as well. That would be at InsidersDFS.